You're on, sir.
Thank you very much, Erin. Good morning, everyone. This is Mayor Bob. We are live at our special meeting, December 18th. I am in Legion Hall, and with me is City Manager Annette Stickard and Committee Member Rob Lyons. And we are ready to do roll call, Bessie Jo, for the council members that are present. And then I will turn it over to Michelle to help us with our first topic.
Councilmember Callan.
Here.
Mayor Giles.
Here.
Councilmember Machezik.
Present.
Let the record show that Councilmember Nielsen and Councilmember Holmes are absent.
All right, Michelle, lead us on our first topic, please.
Okay, so the first topic, I know there's some folks on for the second topic. I see Brian Foote and Caleb. We're just gonna do, I think we scheduled about a half hour or so to have a joint work session with the Housing Advisory Committee and the City Council. So we're gonna take that topic up first, and then we're gonna move on to the next topic. So basically the purpose of this work session today is that we have a Housing Advisory Committee. This is our newest committee, and it was established by the City Council to basically work on the housing issue in Mccall. And so we've been meeting for some time now, and really the members have been wanting to better understand how their time and resources should be allocated, because I think there's more work for them to do than we can really expect of a volunteer committee. So really the purpose of the work session today was an opportunity for the Housing Advisory Committee and the City Council to have a conversation about expectations and priorities for that committee. So first I want to start off, I'm going to give a little background. I'll try to keep it super brief about kind of the history of housing in Mccall. And then we're going to introduce the committee members, and Nick Zello is actually going to update the council on the work that the committee has done so far. And then he's going to actually start a facilitated discussion in terms of next steps for the committee. So with that, maybe before I jump into the background, I want to just kind of see who's on the call this morning. So it sounds like we have Robert Lyons. Pat Hill, are you there? He was going to call in. I know he.
Yeah, I'm on the phone. I had my phone muted, so I'm here.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
so,
and I just wanted to let you know that Colby has joined the meeting, but as far as your team, the only person is Pat. Tony Curtis is trying to join the meeting.
Okay, so I'll just introduce, so Tony sounds like is trying to get on. Diane Cushlin is also on the committee. And as I mentioned, Robert Lyons is in person, and Nick Zello, who hopefully should be getting on the meeting as well. I'm gonna just, before I launch in, I just wanna double check my email to see if anybody's emailing me with, okay, looks like hopefully they're just gonna join us in a couple of minutes. So I just kind of wanted to back up and give everybody a history, because I know for some of you, you may be familiar with the history of housing in Mccall. For others, it may be new information. So I'll try to keep it brief. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Basically, the city of Mccall started its first housing efforts in around 2005, 2006. And at that time, we created something called a community housing program. And it really was sort of a targeted program for our middle income folks. And so the thought was, you know, if you lose your middle class, it's very difficult to get them back. So Mccall started its first housing. Someone needs to hit mute because I can hear myself. Anyway, so the purpose of that program was there was two components. There was a community housing fee that was associated to building permits. And then there was also an inclusionary housing ordinance. And so that was basically a percentage of either lots or units were to be deed restricted for the purpose of community housing. So at the same time we were updating our code, we built a lot of incentives into our code that were supposed to offset kind of the impacts of this sort of mandatory program. The city of Mccall was challenged by the Central Board of Realtors at district court. We lost, so all of those ordinances were repealed, and that's a tool. It was found that it was essentially unconstitutional. So that basically the state didn't give us authority to apply those fees, and the inclusionary housing is not really an option in the state of Idaho for us. And so that's a pretty typical tool that's used, and it's a very effective tool, but we don't have that in our toolbox anymore. So we also had, around that time, we had a developer develop land on Mccall Avenue. So we have 6 lots that the city owns. We worked with, at the time we had a housing authority that was funded by the city and the county. And we worked with the housing authority to essentially put the homes that are currently there. So those homes are basically, so at the time there was a deed restriction on those homes. The city owns the property to the state. It's a 99-year lease, so you often see those leases come up. Fortunately, over time, what happened was the deed restrictions were put into place, the recession hit, and so at that time, basically the housing prices of the Mccall Avenue homes and the market were very similar. So the council at the time got rid of any income qualifications. And but what we've seen over time, fortunately, is that we've seen a number of locals be able to purchase those homes. So that's been good to see that. So as I mentioned, we had a housing authority in place, and that was eventually not funded or kind of terminated because there really wasn't a need. So the recession hit, we had a bunch of market corrections, and I should just back up and say right around the last development boom time was really the first time we saw in Mccall that housing became unattainable for people who lived and worked in Mccall. And so that's why those provisions were put into place. When the recession hit, we saw housing prices go back down, and a lot of people were actually able to purchase homes during that time. So now fast forward, right, where here we are today, and we're seeing that same kind of issue that we saw kind of during the last development boom. So around 2016, we started updating our comprehensive plan. You know, we had hit pause on housing during the recession, knowing that kind of the market was able to provide a certain amount of housing. At the same time, we also saw short-term rentals take off, right? So we knew that that this issue was not going to go away. And we can look to other mountain towns to know that it's a problem that basically communities are always chasing, is that affordability issue. So in 2016, when we started updating our comprehensive plan, we put in our transportation plan, and we also decided it was time to update a housing study. So we did the which is now the 2018 Mccall housing strategy, to get a handle on quantifying kind of what the issues were, the need, and some tools that are available. So the council adopted that in 2018, which was great because that was kind of the basis for the work that has happened in the last couple of years. But still, that was still like basically a plan that wasn't necessarily fully actionable. So we basically took the 2018 plan and said, okay, what can we do right away so that we can start addressing housing? And this was really kind of a staff-led effort. So I'm going to pull up on my screen. Does everybody see a Mccall local housing program document up?
I see it.
Okay, perfect. So basically, this is kind of this was the first effort to basically try to get some things rolling out. So the first thing we did was we decided to start with an incentive program rather than a regulatory program. So we created the incentive program, which essentially is $10,000 per unit that a deed restriction. And so, you know, there's a number of things that happened in order to obtain funding for that through local option tax and the general fund. We've been able to build up some funds, and we're in the process of seeing a number of those actually go into place, which is exciting. We had one unit from the Housing Trust, and then we have the Thompson project that's occurring that intends to put deed restrictions on 12 of those units. So that was kind of the first effort. And then we also, at the same time, we worked with our urban renewal agency. They had a piece of ground. We put out an RFP. Unfortunately, we realized that a lot of that parcel is actually in wetlands, and it didn't end up really kind of penciling for a nonprofit housing developer to develop. But that's still a tool that's out there for city-owned land. And then at the same time, we identified land banking as one of the strategies we wanted to work on, specifically because Mccall doesn't own a lot of land that could be available for local housing projects. So we've identified a number of those parcels, I think, for the council in the past, and we've looked at those, and we established essentially a fund that we can acquire funds every year and have some resources available if we decide to purchase properties. We also identified annexation and rezones as an option. That's basically up to the property owner, and we really haven't had that opportunity to date. We worked on a whole series of code amendments, which you may remember, things like doubling density, increasing height limits, you know, basically requiring accessory structures greater than 1,500 square feet to have a local housing unit. So we did a number of things, including the temporary and seasonal housing. We didn't have a provision in our code for that before we created that code section to make that fairly easy and available for anybody who's interested in that. You know, so basically we laid out all these things. We were able to implement essentially most of them. And now we're at a place where I think that the Housing Advisory Committee's interested in trying to figure out, okay, now what? I think from a staff perspective, I'd like to go back and evaluate our incentive program and really take a look, a hard look at our deed restrictions with kind of a specialist who's able to really evaluate the way that we crafted our deed restrictions. Now that we've worked with it in the last year or so, we kind of know what the issues are around that program, and I think we probably are wanting to tweak that a little bit. So that's basically a general background on sort of where we've been, and I think with that, I will turn it over. Nick, are you on the phone now? Okay, I'm not hearing from him. Bessie Jo, has any of the other members joined us?
I don't see anybody else. If you want to send me.
Bessie Jo, we're having a hard time hearing you, but Michelle, we're not seeing anybody else on here. We've reached out to all of them several times. If you want to forward me phone numbers, I'm happy to personally call.
Okay.
So I'm on the phone, you know, and I think Robert's in person, so I believe it's only the two of us at the moment, correct?
So I think you probably should move forward, Michelle, and we'll keep working on back end.
I mean, with that, I will, maybe I'll turn it over to Pat.
Michelle, can you hear me?
Yeah, Pat, do you want to just kind of give the council a brief update of the work that the committee has done so far, and then we'll turn it over and
Yeah, absolutely.
reach out to the council members to kind of get their sense of what their expectations and direction that they want to provide you guys.
That'd be great. So Nick was going to do a presentation about a strategic plan and an overall guidance of what the committee, suggests and how we should start working with council and how we would be moving forward. I think what Robert and I's section of this is to try to create, the parallel efforts with the strategic plan, so we can actually come up with some, in regard to the property, step-by-step process of how do we first define what a budget. Hello,
Pat, can you hear me?
I can hear
Pat?
you. Yes,
I've been online from the beginning, but for whatever reason,
Nick.
you haven't been
Okay.
able to hear me. So I just dialed in. I can pick it up from here. I've got my presentation up here.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
All right. Is everyone able to hear me, or is it just Pat?
We can hear you.
We can hear you, Nick.
Okay. So as Pat was laying out, we have gotten started down a path. We've been meeting for several months now, and we've gotten to a juncture in the road where it's time to come back to council and just verify what our full charter is. So some of the things that we have accomplished so far, we wrote a mission statement, and I'll cite that in just a moment. We performed a review of the city-owned properties because it was mentioned in some of the existing tools that city-owned properties are part of what we are to consider as part of our plan. We have provided written input to the Payette Lakes Water District Plan, and we developed a working draft of the Housing Strategic Plan. So let me back up and say what we think our mission is, and this is the mission statement that we're looking for verification from the members of the council on. The mission of the City of Mccall Housing Advisory Committee is to create plans for and advise the Mccall City Council on housing strategies to sustain a complete Mccall community where people can afford to both live and work. So the first question is, does that mission statement sound appropriate to the members of the council? The key essence of it is trying to create this complete Mccall community that is a place where it not only has jobs, but it also has housing opportunities for the people who need to work in the city.
This is Mayor Bob. Mike Machezik, what do you think about the mission statement?
Sounds in line to me. Thanks.
Amy?
Sounds great.
Colby?
Yeah, I think it's right on target. It's a good mission statement.
Nick, this is Bob. I'm really good with that. Thank you for presenting that. Let's go on to your next item.
Okay, so as we were reviewing the mission statement, and there was a subcommittee that developed a draft strategic plan, what we realized is that there's kind of two schools of thought within the subcommittee, and we wanted to come back to you to get guidance. And I think the best way to frame it is that we're trying to validate whether we are a long-term strategic planning group that is intended to develop a multi-year path forward and then begin to take action on it, or if we are intended more to be an operations group largely at the direction of City Council and of the plans that have already been approved that Michelle just enumerated. So the question is, do you want us to own the strategic plan and bring you the advice, or do you want to have us be more of a tactical group that executes things?
So before I poll the council, I would like to hear from Michelle and Annette, their opinions on this. Let me start with Michelle.
Yeah, so I don't really have an opinion on this. I think it's really kind of the direction of the council. And I think it's sort of where the committee's been struggling in terms of where to focus their efforts. So really, this is an opportunity, I think, for the committee to hear from the council in terms of how you envision this committee could be most useful to you and to the city.
Annette, anything more?
About that? Yeah, I agree with Michelle. When I think about your other advisory committees, I think it's a little bit of both. I know that some of our committees are very active and engaged in a lot of projects and planning that they develop on their own and then come back for presentation. Public art committee, and they're always in dialogue with the council back and forth, getting direction and getting them. So I would think there's definitely a value in the committee developing what they think the long run.
Your sound is going out.
Okay, is that right? Is that better? Hello?
Better, thank you.
That's better, thank you.
Okay, sorry. What I was saying is that I think there's value on both parts of that the committee develops a longer range plan that we can have the council approval of, then that helps us for budgeting and planning purposes over the big picture. And then I think that two-way street of back and forth on the project is really important. We have very active other committees that kind of do the same thing. So that helps it all, but I think it's important.
I'm having a really hard time hearing you, Annette. I'm sorry. I'm not catching much of anything you're saying.
Annette, unmute yourself.
Bob, mute you. Mute Bob. We muted Bob, so Annette, unmute you, and we'll be able to hear you better.
From your computer.
All right, how about this?
There you go. Yep.
Except now you're going to have echo.
No, you just need to turn down your computer sound. If you turn your computer sound all the way down and then unmute, we'll be able to hear you, but your computer won't relay the sound.
My computer sound is on.
Can you go swap with the mayor, maybe?
Hello?
Yeah, we're trying to
Hello?
work out. We're having a little bit of
so
technical.
somebody needs to unmute Bob if you want me to use it.
Aaron, did you mute Bob? Because I cannot unmute him.
I did not, and I'm trying to unmute him.
Annette, can you turn down the volume on the mayor's computer? If the volume on the mayor's computer can be turned down, then she can turn on her speaker or turn on her microphone on her computer.
Okay.
Oh, his is unmuted now. There we go.
I got it.
Oh my God. Okay, I have run back and forth between two desks 20 times now. All right. So I'm going to take off my mask because I can't articulate very well. I'm just going to say that I think there's value in both approaches, and I think it's a good idea for the committee to come up with a recommended long-term plan, and then we see how we execute it. And that's just my opinion, but it's ultimately the council's choice what they would like to task this group to do.
So this is Pat Hill again. So can everybody hear me? Can
Go ahead,
everybody hear
Pat.
me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay. So for me, I think that's that parallel efforts were referred to is the design team, and then the hopefully some more immediate results and categorizing and prioritizing what we can control, which is what the city can control is their existing property. So if you look back into the 2018 plan that we had in 2018, the Mccall in motion, at that point, median income was $206,000. Median price of home is $206,000. We were 700 units short. We've lost pretty much the ability to do the ADUs during our sewer restrictions, and 90% of our property in the city is single family homes. So the realtor and developer on the team think we could itemize and categorize the properties so we could look at some housing. So since 2018 looks like we've produced 12 houses, and we assembled $140,000. That's not, it's a great start, but we can't wait another 3 or 4 years to come up with another $140,000 and 12 more homes. So the city does have some property. There's some bigger opportunities to produce much larger amount of housing, but it's going to require some engineering, some planning, and Robert actually has a couple of excellent ideas as well. I'm sure he can share them if we have the time. But the point from the assets that you do have and destinies that you can control, at this moment, you have plenty of land that we can start working together to create some inertia. I'm also on the West Central Mountain Housing Trust. We own some property in New Meadows. I've spoken from Cascade to Sherry Maupin to try to keep much more of a cohesive team for the entire valley, so we can hopefully achieve some scale. Okay, scale building cost, it's $320 a foot to build right now. So there's only two options. We need subsidized housing, subsidized development, or we need to be working together as a valley, not just a city, but an entire valley to try to achieve the scale necessary to get a building cost, that lends itself to creating affordable housing. So that would start with maybe a committee with one staff member, one city engineer. We could start analyzing the property and then create a strategic plan moving forward with the existing property that the city does control now. So that would be my suggestion on a first step as an action item.
So this is a quintessential moment for us. This is where the fork in the road exists, because I understand that Pat and Robert have been doing this for a long time and have been part of many of the prior plans, and they're frustrated with planning. They want to act, and I fully appreciate that. The struggle for the other part of the committee is that without a strategic framework in place, it's unclear how to prioritize, how to measure the usability of the individual parcels, how to evaluate which ones to sell, which ones to buy, where the sources of funds are. And so this is exactly where we have gotten stuck. And so the question for the council is, do you want us to pause, develop the strategic framework and act upon that? Or would you like us to create the bifurcated approach, which involves immediate action while developing a longer term framework, but recognizing that immediate action may not be consistent with what the longer term framework winds up being.
Well, let me correct you, Nick, a little bit. So I have to correct the statement. What we're trying to do is analyze the potential capacity of the existing land without making any decisions. You can't make a decision as a council until we figure out what the capacity of the land. It takes engineering, it takes some time for you to make an intelligent decision of the capacity of the land. Once that intelligent decision of understanding the capacity of land and the ability, then you would incorporate that within the strategic plan. It needs to be parallel efforts. You can't say, hey, I need housing without having the tool necessary of the potential of the housing that you have. So moving forward with that, my opinion is we need to understand the capacity of the existing property that you have, and of course the willingness if you even want to look at doing housing in certain locations. So until we can't create a strategic plan if you don't know the tools that you have available to you.
Michelle, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, you're the facilitator of this topic. Nick is helping you, as is your committee, and we're learning by the minute. And this is great. We had budgeted about 30 minutes. I'm going to make a decision that we will continue on for another 20 minutes. We'll go over our time that we budgeted, but I would like you to facilitate this discussion. I was asked by, I believe it's Nick, he wanted to hear from the council. So I will try to get that started, and then I'd like you to take charge of the final 20 minutes. Does that sound good?
That sounds good, yeah.
Very much, appreciate it. All right, council, I would like you to respond to Nick's question. If you want to know where I'm leaning, I found it very helpful, Annette's comments to me. And I would say in general, we want it all. We want things happening today, and we want a strategic plan. It's probably not realistic, but we want it all. So let's hear from each of you, and then we will turn it back over to Michelle. Let's start with Mike.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so to the Housing Committee members, yes, there's of course no question that this is a difficult matrix to put together and try to find near-term solutions, let alone long-term ones. I think it's particularly difficult right now because all housing costs are high, not just the cost of purchasing land, the cost of construction, as Pat noted, etc. So not easy, but from the council housing committee, how we work together, I think what's most effective with committees is for the committee to bring suggestions forth, perhaps then look for direction from council as to whether or not to continue down that avenue, and then keep pursuing until the point that the housing committee has a recommendation or has a couple of suggestions and or alternatives that we can then move forward on. So I think it really, the suggestions and ideas, we've put together the housing committee of people that have value to that, and each bring different levels of experience and qualities to the table to then present to us with a suggestion. Now, that being said, if you're needing more direction from the council, I think we need a starting point from what you guys believe are the most viable options, or what are the directions that you want to look at? Are you looking at specific, I mean, I certainly can come up with ideas, but what are where is the direction that you would like to go, and then bounce that back off council. But I think that the initial ideas, concepts, and suggestions should be coming from the housing committee, and then we can respond to specific questions or ideas from there.
Okay,
thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. And I'm thinking once we get through the council, I'd love to hear from the other housing advisory committee members as well, so that they can share with the council kind of some of their thoughts too.
Great idea, Michelle. We'll make sure we take time to do that. All right, Cammie, you're next.
Yeah, so I think that I like the idea of the committee to bring us some viable ideas and direction that they would like to go, like we do, as Nanette said, on some of the other committees. I think it's important to have, you know, if they want to do engineering, like Pat said, on some of the land that the city already owns and what they can do with that land, not necessarily pay for the engineering, but some ideas with that, then we can move forward and see if it's a viable option for the city to do. So, you know, I like the idea of getting some ideas from the committee and some options, and so that the council can decide on which route to go and have them, you know, proceed with that route.
Thank you, Cammie. Colby?
Yeah, I guess first I'd like to say that I really appreciate the work that the Housing Committee has been putting in. It sounds like you guys are really making some good progress on this and getting to this point where you would like this direction. And I guess the short answer that I have is I'd like to see you guys continue on both of those paths at the same time, which is kind of tough. You know, obviously the need for housing is urgent currently, and it's going to continue to be into the future. It's definitely a challenge to figure out what where we can take action now and how do we continue to plan and prepare for the future. So yeah, short answer is I'd like to see both things happening.
Thank you, Colby. This is Bob. I've been on council for 7 years, and we work with different people. And one thing that I can share with you is we're best at being thoroughly brief, the way you try to do that, all the staff and committees, and we're pretty good at making decisions. And we always want to make sure that we understand what a particular committee thinks is a good path forward. So that's why I liked the answer and the guidance that I received from Annette, and that's where I would weigh in. I think that's a pretty good approach. And I'm also very appreciative of all the work that we've done to date. We're very proud of this committee. I would urge you to hang in there together and work out your differences in terms of maybe vision and short-term and long-term. And I am sincere when I say we want it all. We know we can't get it all, and priorities have to be made, but that's what you're hearing from council, and we will make good decisions when we're briefed, so hang in there and help us. With that, Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you so that we can hear from your committee members.
Yeah, so I think we haven't heard yet from Diane.
Yes, thank you, Michelle, and council and mayor and council. I think this has been a very interesting process for me personally. You know, I'm a planner, so I have in my DNA looking at the long term and the sustainability of the community. And we all know this is a crisis here. It's a crisis everywhere. We have a unique crisis being a resort community. And I think, as Nick says, this is so critical both to the economy and to what he describes as a complete community, a community that has people that live and die and have associations and work and play in the community. It's the foundation and the fabric of what makes this place great. And if we lose that, we're really just another, stop on the destination. So I see this as a real crisis. And I think the issues that we brought to you are very short term. They're, in my perspective, a drop in the bucket in terms of the overall need. It's my sense that we need to be very, very bold. If we're going to respond to this, we need to really think very hard. And this has been a high priority for the council. And I think we as a committee can respond to discrete assignments or very specific things, but that's not going to solve this issue. And that's why I sort of support this idea of a strategic plan, to think more boldly, more long-term. And if we do that, we're going to need some resources. 1/10 of Michelle is not enough. If this is a priority for the community, I think you need to think hard about resourcing this effort with some outside help, with some more organization, whatever it takes. And that's what I think we hope to analyze through a strategic planning process. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you so much for listening to us.
Okay, we also haven't heard yet from Tony, who looks like you've joined us. Welcome.
It's always a process, isn't it? Yeah, I appreciate all you guys' input. I think it's really great. This is a crisis. We see it over and over and over in all of our businesses and all of our communications with everybody in town. I can't tell you how many times it's a heartbreaking story about people looking for a house. They can't afford a house. I have a property management company. I get calls all the time. Do I have rentals? And I just don't. I simply don't. This is something that we need to get on top of right away. And I think having a good strategic plan in place is really a good step going forward. I think an analysis of all the programs that the city has put together, it's been great to go through those and look at those and really just make the decision as to what's going to work best and what can we take with and run. I do like the idea of maybe being able to work simultaneously with 2 different plans, create the long-term plan, and let's do the analysis on the city-owned properties if that's an option to utilize those. Our committee seems to be able to work in 2 different directions like that kind of already. So I really foresee that we could do that at the same time right now until we come up with a good solution. And I really appreciate the council's input. Thank you. Thank you for everybody that's been a part of this and putting this together. I appreciate it.
Okay, and I think we still also need to hear from Robert, who's in the room.
All right, hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I am on the committee as far as ready to do action now. I think it's imperative. We have wintertime right now that allows us to do some planning, potentially have things going this next summer. I've been in charge of kind of compiling the city properties that we could potentially utilize sooner as the first start as we develop the long-term plan. Because clearly the long-term plan is super important, but also is housing now. And so some of the guidance, as we talked about as a committee, that we'd like to see from council, part of what you've already explained to us today or expressed today is great. But some of it is, okay, on the land, for example, we've identified a couple properties that will not be sensible for housing. They're too small and they're too valuable. So, and I can bring you plans in your next meeting. If you want action, I can bring it next meeting on multiple ideas. But for one, on these particular 2 parcels, is the city even open to potentially selling a parcel? Between these 2, we could easily put in $400,000 profit into the housing fund to have for us to be able to fund other projects. And again, these parcels are single-family parcels that do not make sense for housing. They're too valuable. So part of what I would like to see is, does the city even open to possibly selling some land if it makes sense? And then, I've got people that actually come to me, 2 different developers that are not small developers. They've done hundreds of properties a year. And they can build on a scale, keeping the property in the realm of being affordable. They're open to keep it as long-term rentals with the deed restrictions. One of which was actually on our group that I did not have on our list because it didn't seem to make sense, but this builder actually has property right next door that they're building. He came to me with a proposal. So again, I can bring you this proposal next week, or we have next meeting or first of the month, that, you know, if we did an RFP, clearly everything has to go RFP. It's not going to focus on any one person, but he could potentially start building next year. And it'd be a matter of, do we want not necessarily sell the land? Do we do an RFP with guidance of, does the city want to still keep it? Or do we say, okay, we will give this to you if you build X amount and they're deed restricted within the parameters that we require. So some of those items is, I think, more me and Pat are looking for. We got stuff we can move forward immediately. I mean, this property could be starting to build next year and have 4 units ready for people by next fall or this time next year. And that's just a couple examples, but I think we really need to have some clarification. And I don't need it today necessarily, but here pretty quick on selling, yes or no. Are you open to trade? So if we give a piece of property to somebody and they give us, you know, let's say this one lot, we might get 3 or 4 other lots that could be better suited for housing. Or do you want to be partners with the developer? So similar to the Mill Street properties, the city will retain ownership, but it's a long-term lease, so people could still make sense financially in doing it. So, like I say, I am in the sense of I see the urgency, and planning is great, and especially if we can do it simultaneously, which I think we have to do. But we also need to know from council, like, no, we are absolutely not open to sell anything. Great, we won't focus on that. We'll create, you know, go to the next step, or don't even take our time up on addressing that. Or is it something that's like, okay, whatever you're doing, bring us the plan and we'll say yes or no. You kind of stated today so far that you're open about anything. I'm pretty much prepared to bring you stuff immediately at your next meetings, if not the next one, the one following that. And it could be a yes or no, that's fine. I just, you know, we can plan things to death. I've been on many committees and meetings or things, and we plan and we plan and we plan, and we don't get stuff done. People out there that are living in trailers right now at numerous places in town in the winter without water, and I could take you to several of them, but I know there's more than a dozen. They don't have time for us to plan for next 2 years. This winter, we should be able to have some projects approved, ready to go out of the ground, and it doesn't need to be projects of 50 or 60 of them. If we can, it'd be great. But even if it's 10 that is starting, or 5, we have to start. And I think we, as a group, we've got a lot of great experiences, and I think we certainly can work simultaneously and do multiple things. We can walk and chew gum. But, you know, that's where we've been struggling though a little bit, is what do we want, or how can we move forward on some things? So that's pretty much where I'm at. I've got other things, but I know we're kind of limited on time. But it's pretty much what I want to see, or get some advice from the council, is like, if you're ready for us to bring plans, say yes or no, that would be great.
All right, thank you, Robert. I just want to respect the council's time. I think we only have a couple minutes left. I think we're obviously not going to resolve all of the issues. One of the things that the committee members did want to establish was basically like a communication strategy. So we're happy to come to the council and provide regular updates and that sort of thing. And we can bring specific proposals as agenda items to the council. But if you have any further guidance that you want to provide the housing committee, that would be great at this point. I know we only have a couple minutes left.
Thank you, Michelle. This is Bob. I'm gonna use my privilege as mayor to do the closeout on this. And first, I want to say thanks to all the people that serve on this committee. I would plead with you to hang in there, continue to bring your passion to the meetings and help us. I think it's a great committee. Heard some really great stuff, really good information, and lots of opportunities from every one of you. The second thing I'd like to say is I want to go back to Diane's comment. It was a very key point about being bold, and this council is up to that challenge. I have seen them in action, and I've seen them act bold and do things that are very innovative. So we're not afraid of that if staff work and the committee work has been done and you bring things like that to us, whether it be in the strategic plan or things that are short term. With that, I think we will close out this topic and move on to our discussion on State Highway 55.
Mayor, I rebuilt a hydraulic motor this morning at 6:30, and I really made every effort to be at this meeting. And this is something that I'm truly passionate about. And we've been asked specific questions, and I mean, I know it's nice to say thanks to these guys, but the sense of urgency to keep moving forward on something, I think, is there. And it's in two lanes going in the same direction. You know, I'm really curious about what we can do immediately and what we can do immediately to begin more strategic planning and long range planning. I would like to get that out there. So I would hope that we could get both of those items on upcoming agendas here sooner than later.
Yeah, this was scheduled for discussion only, and I don't think I said anything that we weren't open to that idea, Colby. So I agree with you. In future meetings, we are interested in both those. Are you suggesting that we continue on this topic this morning, or was that your closing remark?
I don't think we need to continue on, but I feel like it's important that we end the conversation with some direction moving forward.
Mayor,
Oh,
I
ahead.
also would agree with Colby. I think it would be great for the committee to bring a couple proposals or ideas in the next meetings or sometime in January or February. So then we have some ideas on what we can move forward with so that this does move forward instead of it just getting pushed and more and more. And it is a valid need in our community. And I think that it would be great for some proposals or some ideas so that we can make some decisions and move forward.
Yeah, this is Mike. I just wanted to respond to Robert's suggestions and comments there, and I understand that the group might feel a little bit overwhelmed with the big picture. At the same time, I think looking at the short term, if we've got something that's so big that it's hard to take a bite out of or swallow, that we might want to take some smaller pieces and start working in that direction and have some momentum, which is what we've done in the past. I was on the Valley Adams Regional Housing Authority. We did accomplish the Springs Apartments, which has been very successful. We also have the Mccall Avenue Homes. We're working on other projects. And I think that Robert's suggestion to bring proposals to the table for consideration and keep moving forward on specific items might help keep the momentum of the Housing Advisory Committee going. And I certainly would like to hear suggestions from the group on suitable projects or suggested projects. So yes, to answer your question, Robert, at least from my perspective on council and looking at the big picture here, I think that what you're hearing from those of us is that we would like to see what your recommendations are and then vet those out and sort those out and see if there's some solutions, particularly towards how do we develop rental properties? What are your suggestions? What are your ideas? Give us some specifics and let's keep moving on it. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Okay. Colby, do you have any other comments you'd like to make?
No, thank you, and sorry to be abrupt. I just felt like we needed to end with a little bit of direction on that, and I appreciate you hearing that. Thank you, Mayor.
Tammy?
Yeah, and thanks for your openness. I appreciate you guys being open and willing to work with us on that.
Mayor, this is Cammie. I don't have any further questions or direction.
Thank you, Kenny. Mike, any further direction?
Yeah, well, let me just ask this. Robert, does that give you, and Pat and Tony and Diane, does that, have we been helpful? Are we giving you something to kind of go on, some direction to work with? Maybe Robert, you could just respond real quick.
Yeah, Mike, I think that helps a lot. So I think that kind of clarifies some things that just me and Pat were looking at doing to where we could kind of bring you specific items, keep the ball moving, show the community that we're doing something, show, you know, that the city is moving forward on getting housing, and in the same sense, also work for the big picture, because we're not going to create 700 units overnight. So I think that clearly shows that the committee is kind of on the right track, and that, you know, we can, again, I might be in the fast lane, they're more on the slow and steady, but together we're both going to get there ultimately. So I look forward to bringing some proposals for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, we've been out at this for an hour. It is now 9:56. We're going to adjourn for 4 minutes, take a quick break, and at 10 a.m. we will start up on our second topic with the quarter study. Nathan Stewart, are you online with this right now?
Yeah, Mayor.
Thank you, Nathan. So at 10 a.m. I will turn it over to you to introduce our guests from ITD and any other guests that are helping present. Thanks.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. Okay.
All right, we are back live. This is Bob, and I'm going to ask Nathan to introduce our guests today, our consultants, and our staff from.
Okay, good morning, City Council. Nathan Stewart, Public Works Director. It's my pleasure this morning to bring to you a team that's been working on our corridor study for the past year. First thing I want to do is I want to bring up the screen. I believe we have a PowerPoint presentation together for you. And so this is an interesting project. It started with a lot of community interest and then some real concerted efforts from ITD staff as well as the city. This is a joint funded project. Majority of the funding is coming from ITD as well as the city. And it's been something that's essential for us to talk about a very difficult topic. So the overall goal here is really to gain information for both agencies so we can be more intelligent. The title of this report is a corridor exchange study, and it's not necessarily rooted in the specifics of an exchange, but really trying to identify and define what these corridors are about and the expenses that are incurred. So the team that we've put together here, lead project engineer is Chris Melander. He's on as a presenter today. He will be working the slides. Brian Foote, Principal of Horrocks, who you met last night, has been deeply involved in attending the majority of the meetings. So that's the consultant team. We also have representatives on the call today. Caleb Lakey, our District 3 engineer, has been instrumental in helping get this project off the ground. His personal interest in this and his experience in doing corridor exchanges throughout Idaho or throughout at least the district have been successful, and we've really relied on his perspective as we've put this together. And then we also have the fortune of having an ITD board member, Julie De Lorenzo, is on the call as well. So we're really honored to have her here and look forward to her participation and understanding what we've done. So that's kind of the format that we have today as far as who's attending. That's not just on the council or maybe in the audience. So this is an open work session. You certainly have the opportunity to ask questions whenever you want. There is a raise your hand button. You might consider using that in your interface, but if you need to, certainly pipe up and ask a question and we'll stop and go from there. So as I said, Chris, our lead project engineer, is going to be leading us through this, but Brian and I will also be doing some talking. So I think at this point I can pass it over to Brian.
Yep. All right. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it. Mayor Giles, Council, Board Member De Lorenzo, Caleb. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you presenting today. Chris, if you could advance to the next slide. Kind of wanted to give you an overview of what we're going to do today. We got a brief presentation. We're hoping that we're trying to keep it to about 20 minutes. We wanted to really do three things. Give you just a little perspective of the history of this project and where it's come from. Summarize what's in the report. I realize there's a lot of detail in this report, so we want to give you kind of a high-level summary. But probably the most important step will be the third, which is we want to have some discussion about next steps. Where do we go from here? And get some clear direction. So, Chris, if you could advance the slide again. So a little bit about the project history. This potential reroute of Highway 55 is nothing new. It's been something that's been discussed in the city of Mccall for years. In their most recent transportation master plan, this was actually identified as the city's preferred long-term plan for Highway 55 is to reroute it down Dinehart and Boydstone. ITD actually reviewed and provided feedback on that plan at the time. During the summer of 2019, Caleb Lakey from District 3 and Nathan Stewart from the city and myself had some initial discussions about this concept and about what it might take to actually make this plan a reality. At that time, Caleb identified an opportunity with the ITD Transportation Board's annual board tour of District 3 that was going to be happening in September, that we could have a board stop in Mccall, allow some of the council members and the mayor and other staff from Mccall to get on the bus, and we could actually drive both of these routes through Mccall and talk about kind of big picture what some of the benefits to both agencies would be. We did that on the 11th of September 2019, and out of that the project began to get some momentum. There were some discussions that were initiated between ITD and the city. They agreed to jointly fund a study of what it might take to make this corridor exchange a reality. We initiated a scope of work in, I think it was about January of this year, to start working on this study, and we began work. So next slide, Chris. So let's talk a little bit about the purpose of the study. This graphic kind of shows both routes. Existing 55 obviously goes down the orange route of 3rd and Lake Street. And then you can see the Dinehart Boydstone route. This is a classic case of Highway 55 being Mccall's main street. And whenever you have this scenario, you have competing interests. Sometimes the goals of ITD are in direct conflict with the goals of the city and vice versa. There is some obvious benefits to routing 55 down Dinehart and Boydstone, and we discussed those on the board tour. I mean, there's significantly less accesses. There's a lot less potential for pedestrian conflicts. They've already got substantial amount of intersection improvements on Dinehart and Boydstone. There's some obvious benefits, but really the goal of this study and the purpose of this study was to identify what are the costs of the improvements that would need to be done to Dinehart and Boydstone to bring it up to an acceptable standard for ITD to accept that as Highway 55. And then in turn, what are the costs of the improvements that the city would desire to be made to 3rd and Lake Street to bring that corridor up to what their standards are for a corridor like this, a Main Street corridor, if you will, through Mccall. So that really was the scope of this project, was to really get down and start looking at these costs a little bit. And we're going to review kind of some of those costs. Now, a lot of those costs are things that might be desires, and some of them are things that are absolute necessities. And so we'll kind of go through that a little bit as we go through here. But first, I'm going to turn the time to Chris. One of the most important things is these intersections on either end of the project. What would you have to do to those? And those obviously are going to be common to both projects. So Chris, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the intersections?
Sure, thanks, Brian. So like Brian said, the two intersections at either end of these corridors where they meet at Dinehart and 55, and then at Boydstone and Lake Street or 55. There's been some effort by a couple different parties to evaluate the costs to improve these intersections. I believe in 2019, both ITD and private development looked at improvements, first off, to this intersection here that's shown on the slide with Dinehart and State Highway 55. And the costs that are shown here are representative for improvements to the right turn lane movement from Dinehart onto southbound State Highway 55. A little bit different approach was taken in each of these assessments. ITD's estimate was a little more robust with a free right turn, whereas the development's approach was to just accommodate a WV67 design vehicle, and I think that's reflected in the cost difference there. And so for this intersection, we kind of have on the high side, near $1 million and about $500,000 on the other. Moving to the other intersection at Lake and Boydstone or 55 in Boydstone. significantly different approaches between ITD, shown here at the top, and private development, but both would improve capacity as well as turning movements through the intersection. And again, there's a fairly significant difference between the cost of these two approaches. One thing I would also want to add here, as we roll up to the very end and we look at the summary of all the costs, we folded in here some other improvements that take place along the the existing State Highway 55 corridor. One of the things that is in the city's master transportation plan is to widen State Highway 55 between Dinehart and Colorado to a 3-lane section, so a center left turn lane to be added. Also to the west of downtown, there are a couple of intersections that have been identified as needing a center left turn lane just at the intersection, not a continuous center left turn lane. All of those improvements together would be an additional 1.6 million onto the State Highway 55 corridor. Those and so those we've lumped those in with the intersection costs in addition to these major intersections at either end of the corridor. I think I heard somebody about to mention something, so I want to pause for just a moment and let them speak if they had something to say.
Yeah, Chris, this is Nathan. I just wanted to express that the estimate that was provided for this roundabout was provided by ITD and their engineering team, but the desire for those, the difference between this private development as shown on your screen and the proposed roundabout is consistent, at least at the staff level, with what's been presented in our master plan and the benefits of a roundabout. So although this slide kind of shows this is ITD's preferred or ITD's identifying that, that would be a shared preference by the city, at least at the staff level and ITD.
Very good, thank you, Nathan. I'm going to go on to and actually going through each individual corridor here. So the reason why we put the two intersections up front, they are common to both corridors, and they may be funded in part by private development, but regardless of which which is selected, it's going to require participation from both and to complete those. So now I'd like to just step through each corridor independently. The State Highway 55, the Third and Lake corridor, shown here on the slide. We evaluated in the report several different categories, including multimodal facilities, drainage, pavement condition, right-of-way, and others. But what you see here on this slide is just the ones that we identified as having costs that would contribute to improvements on the corridor. And so we're going to step through here these four different categories on Third and Lake. So the first one is multimodal facilities, and I want to define what that means real quick. That would include sidewalks, pathways, pedestrian ramp improvements. Also identified by the city is lighting for those facilities. Also, any pathways. There is a few sections where the master transportation plan identifies some detached pathways in lieu of sidewalk, and so that's really what we're talking about when we say multimodal facilities. As we approached, trying to identify the costs associated with what the city wants to do on State Highway 55, we took data from the city as well as data from ITD, compiled that, and supplemented that with some field work to go through and verify the information that we got and supplement it as well. there are a few breaks within the existing system on State Highway 55 where there are no pedestrian or multimodal facilities. And so we focused in those areas trying to identify the cost to improve those sections. And from that, at a high level here, I'd refer you to the report for more detail, but the estimated cost is between $8 and $9 million to make those improvements for the gaps on State Highway 55. The next area that we evaluated on State Highway 55 is drainage and utilities. The main cost associated with drainage on State Highway 55 is treating several discharges that are currently untreated that go straight into Payette Lake. And there are 7 of those. And in the report, we go through and discuss what it's going to take at each of those locations to get an acceptable level of treatment. There's also some, as you take some of these street sections that are currently in more of a rural configuration, taking those and creating a more urban configuration with curb, gutter, and sidewalk. There's also going to be some additional inlets that would be required, conveyance and pipes from those inlets to the larger system. And so we quantified all that, worked with the city and also with some state bid history data to come up with an estimated cost for the drainage improvements. And those are shown here on the slide, between $4 and $5 million approximately to make those improvements. As you're doing that, the water lines within the existing right-of-way tend to be in that zone of conflict. And with the information that we gathered from the city, we attempted to identify all of the potential conflicts and put a cost to that. And so that's the $700,000 number represented there. As you put in new pipes, you're having to address those conflicts. One other thing that we added here to this slide is utility costs. Although not associated directly with drainage, in order to put in the sidewalk and other widening improvements on, particularly along Lake Street, there's just not enough room to keep the power poles where they're in the utility poles where they're currently located, and fit in the sidewalks. And so ITD and the city have been talking for some time now about an estimate of cost to above and beyond what it would take to move the poles to put that power underground. And so Idaho Power has provided the city with an estimate, and that's about $1 million to move that power underground. Moving on to the next section, pavement condition was another area that we evaluated. In this area, we coordinated with ITD. They currently have a project programmed for the year 2025 in their STIP to resurface and rehabilitate the pavement on State Highway 55 through this corridor. And they have estimated that cost to be $1.3 million. And then on, let's see here. Looks like I might be missing a slide. I apologize about that. Nope, I'm good. We're going to talk about that when we get onto the next corridor. On right-of-way, we looked at any of these sections that are being improved in the Mccall Master Transportation Plan on State Highway 55 and being widened. Where are those sections needing more room than what the current right-of-way allows for? And although there's enough room for the road to fit between Floyd and Stibnite, there is a significant protrusion of a hill that comes down in that area. And in order to get the widening that we need, a retaining wall is going to be required. So we added that cost in to this portion here, and we're estimating that retaining wall to be approximately $200,000. And then additionally, as you go around through the downtown core and onto the west, there's a section between First and Mission that's going to need an additional approximately 7 feet. And using some planning level figures, we're estimating that acquiring that property is going to be on the order of about $300,000 through that section. So we've wrapped up the Third and Lake corridor through there. Those are those issues that we touched on were the main costs contributing to improvements on Third and Lake. Now we're going to move on to the Dinehart Boydstone corridor. On this corridor, in order to get it from where it's at today to where ITD would like to see it, if they were to adopt this corridor, not as many categories came into play, and it really came down to geometrics and pavement condition. Again, we discussed all of these categories in the report, but for to keep things brief in this presentation, we're just going to focus on geometrics and pavement condition here. So the biggest geometric issue with Dinehart Boydstone is some tight curves that you encounter just to the west of the intersection with State Highway 50, the current existing State Highway 55. At that location near the fire station and near the north end of the airport runway, you have some fairly tight reverse curves that have a design speed of 25 miles per hour. ITD would like to see this design speed improved to 35 miles per hour. And back in 2019, they prepared a layout for this without a cost estimate. So we've added, we've done a planning level cost estimate for these improvements. And I should note that this cost does not include the acquisition of right-of-way or coordination with the airport to go through this area here. But the construction costs that we're estimating here are about 1.3 million, and this would flatten out these curves and make and also widen these lanes for truck traffic. So on Dinehart and Boydstone, pavement is also something that they're planning. Pavement improvements are something that the city's planning for. There's a, when comparing it to State Highway 55, it's a little bit different situation. State Highway 55, they're planning to do a complete mill and overlay of the road through here. On Dinehart Boydstone, a lot of the pavement is in fairly good condition and will only require crack and seal and chip seal, but there are a few locations where a more robust pavement rehabilitation will be required. And putting those two together, we're estimating that the cost to rehabilitate or preserve pavement on Dinehart Boydstone at about $1 million. Again, you can go to pages 20 and 21 in the report for more information on that. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Brian to talk about the cost summary here.
Yeah, thanks. So Chris kind of went through these elements that we looked at on both of these corridors, and this kind of shows you when you kind of put it all together, what you're looking at. We've got on both of these estimates on 55 and on Dinehart Boydstone, we've kind of got a high and a low, a range, if you will, of estimates. Bottom line, when you go down to the bottom line, we're thinking that all of these costs are going to be somewhere on 55 that we discussed, somewhere between 18 and 20 million. And then on Dinehart Boydstone, we're thinking we're probably looking at a range between 3 and 4 million of improvements. Now, let me point out a couple things. A big part of the cost on 55 is the multimodal facilities. And you remember that's made up of, sidewalks, ADA improvements, and lighting is what that cost is. So that's a significant part. And then the other significant part is drainage. And largely what that drainage cost is solving is these direct discharges into Payette Lake. It's providing the treatment on those discharges that anybody who owns that corridor, I think, would like to see. And space is very limited, so the options that we have to go to are more filtration and vortex separator type options. They're more mechanical, which are typically a little more expensive because we just don't have the room for a lot of those. And then, of course, some of these other costs, the intersections. The other thing I want to point out is the intersection cost. The intersections are common to both of them. So if you will, the intersections are probably double counted in these estimates. They're counted in the Dinehart Boydstone estimate. They're also counted in the 55 estimate. The reason the 55 estimate is a little more is because, as Chris talked about, there's a section between Colorado and Dinehart where we went to a 3-lane section to meet the city's transportation master plan approach, which was to put a center turn lane there. And then there was also 2 left turn pockets that were added on Lake Street. So that's why that cost is a little more, but the actual intersections on the north and south end are common to both. That kind of gives you an idea of the cost here. I'll kind of, Nathan, I'm going to pass back to you. I think the next step really is to start kind of discussing where do we go from here, I think, Nathan and Caleb, and I'll kind of let you guys kind of head up that discussion, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So what I anticipated at the beginning of this effort, and I think what we're here to show today is, these are significant costs. And when you look at both the city and ITD's budgets, the money's not there currently. But as I've presented to the council more recently, our recent 7 to 8 year CIP, we're starting to program some funding into future years to start addressing these issues. So, inevitably the next step is to find the money. But it also requires a commitment, more of a position for both agencies to say, yes, this is something we want to keep moving forward on. So I look forward to getting some comments from the council today. But I have thought about some of the next steps, and I'm happy to share them with you. And Caleb, please feel free to chime in at any time that you choose. I'm going to go back to my notes here. So one of the probably low-hanging fruit that we have is our maintenance agreement. Currently, ITD maintains 55 through the winter, and as we're all familiar with, they plow the road up to First Street, and then they lift their plow blades and do sanding and salting down through the downtown core, and then they drop their snow plow blades when they get to Colorado heading south. And they do that because they don't want to damage parked cars or other facilities, sidewalks and whatnot with the snow. And so the city of Mccall kind of collectively, we come in the morning and take care of removing snow there. So we've created some operational efficiency in how we do that. But when we think about how a large semi truck that needs to travel the ITD corridor in the wintertime, they rely on the quality of pavement and de-icing that happens on the highway. And although we'd all like to reroute those vehicles down Boydstone and Dinehart, the city of Mccall simply is not capable. We don't have the staff or the equipment or the resources to have a 24/7 crew making sure that the hills on Dinehart are free of ice. So one of the things is to look at our maintenance agreement and see what we can do in the short term to possibly revise that agreement, which it's in very much need of being revised and reapproved because it's over 50 years old. So that possibly we could have ITD maintain Boydstone and Dinehart in the winter, and then we could formally sign that as a truck route. That would kind of build some inertia into this effort. Obviously, incorporating some of these improvements into both ITD and the City of McCall's capital improvement plans, and trying to identify and start saving funding to make these happen. The next thing too is working with the airport and the airport master plan to really hone in on, what potentials exist to possibly widen those curves on Dinehart and Boydstone, because there are some direct conflicts there. And that work is occurring, working with Rick Stein and TO engineers, trying to identify that and work through the FAA. It's very obvious we need to continue to work with the private developers and look at opportunities where we can to utilize their investment in our community to make some of these improvements, particularly at some of the intersections. And then we also need to talk with some of the utilities that are within these rights of way. We have overhead power utilities, we have underground fiber optic utilities, we have underground sewer facilities, and all of those facilities will need to get relocated in some sense if we make some of these major improvements to drainage and whatnot. Obviously, our water department is deeply engaged in planning to make some of those improvements, but we need to communicate with them so when the time comes, they have the funding necessary to relocate their facilities as well. And then I think probably one of the most exciting, but also most difficult, is to try to collaborate with ITD as future large dollar grant opportunities come along. They do come along. There's different terms that are used, whether it's a Tiger grant or a Making America Better grant, or these are major projects, extremely competitive throughout the nation, that might lend a huge shot of adrenaline to making some of these improvements. And I think we've got good staff and good collaboration with ITD to do so. Those are some of my thoughts.
Well, good morning, Mayor and City Council. This is Caleb from ITD. Appreciate the opportunity to join this meeting today and share a few thoughts with you regarding this project. Appreciate Nathan's partnership on this and Horrocks for helping us pull this together. As Nathan mentioned, it's been talked about several times. We wanted to get our head around what would it really take and what's all out there. Let's get it all on the table so that decision makers, both at the city and the state level, can have a feel for what's being considered and where we might be able to find, obviously, common ground, but also maybe a compromise or a deal to get us closer to what we want. And so I'd like to emphasize that to the council, that what's been presented today is meant to be all the information that we have out there on the board. It's a range of options. It's not meant to be a checklist of everything that has to happen before we can continue conversations. And so some of the numbers, there's a lot of stuff going on the current 55, and that's good to understand, and I'm glad we've quantified that. But I also just want to emphasize that it's not intended to be a benchmark of, hey, these two agencies have to get to this point before we can have conversations. Was not our intent as a team anyways. And there's several concepts involved here that I know the council's aware of, but I just want to draw your attention to that there's many benefits to this exchange that maybe aren't so quantifiable. We can, there's just a lot of perceived benefit to exchanging the roadways. We also have, in my perception, we have the willing parties at the table, and that's not to say that parties weren't willing in the past, but we have, between Nathan and I, a lot of coordination going on. We've brought the ITD board up there and have presented to the subcommittee on highway adjustments about this and have their concurrence to proceed. Obviously, we're presenting to the city council today to talk about this. I think there's something to be said about some synergy there of everybody being on the same page. And I think in the past, we've had different parties at different times, never had everybody at the same place. So part of what Nathan and I were intending to do was to get this feasibility study done to keep that focus and to help us move forward. And really, again, in the end, we're trying to get closer to what we want. And so we need to talk about, and that's the purpose of this discussion, of what that looks like, what the next steps are, and how we can leverage opportunities like grants, like development, like potentially maintenance alterations to get us closer to where we want. In my mind, and in the experience I've had in doing some of these, there's kind of three ways to approach this, and I'll give you a current example of each one. The first one would be, we say, hey, we have a list of things we want done on our corridor, and you have some on your corridor, and we want those conditions met before we decide we're going to exchange the roadway. So a current example of that would be Council, Idaho. Many of you are probably aware that the state built a bypass around Council, state highway bypass. That bypass was constructed in advance of exchanging the roadways and the city of Council taking over the old roadway and the state obviously continuing maintenance and responsibility for the new roadway. The second example would be just that we decide we want to make an exchange, we draft up an agreement and we make the exchange. And in part of that exchange, there's provisions for the improvements we want to make. So an example of this would be an agreement we made with the city of Caldwell, where we talked with city staff about the condition of the roadway they were taking over from us, some of their concerns, some of their long-term maintenance needs, staffing needs, and provisions were made in the exchange, in that case in a dollar figure, to the city, to where we wrote an agreement and exchanged money with them for those provisions. And they took it basically as is with provisions to help make the improvements in the future. The third example or third option would be a combination of the two, where we say, hey, we can move forward on some pieces, but maybe not all the pieces, and get us close to where we want to be. A current example of this would be the city of Mountain Home, where we're not exchanging the roadway, but the mechanism we've used there is the city has a desire to do a downtown revitalization project, which is very similar to a lot of the multimodal stuff that was talked about in your presentation here. It's sidewalk improvements, drainage improvements, bike lane improvements, ADA improvements, all of that kind of stuff. The state had a project coming through town, very similar to what we have going on here in the city of Mccall, and we coordinated our efforts. And the city actually is administering our construction contract as part of a larger project to improve their downtown corridor. So leveraging for example, getting some efficiency in mobilizing a paving crew out there, taking advantage of that as part of our contract to get some additional things done in their downtown core. So that's a current example that I think may be applicable here. All three of those options are viable. There's benefits and negatives to all three of those. And I just wanted to kind of tee that up for the council for discussion on, where we think the comfort level is and what direction we'd like to head. We certainly would like to continue to move forward on this. Again, I think there's opportunity here with the staff that we currently have and the elected officials involved that say, hey, we want to explore this further. So thank you for your time and certainly would stand for any questions.
So Nathan, are you ready for me to facilitate questions then?
Certainly, yeah. Thank you, Caleb, for sharing those thoughts, and very much appreciate kind of explaining that this is by no means the minimum metric that we need for any kind of agreement. This is giving us the tools. I think at the staff level we really understand that, and I think it's important in our messaging as this conversation revolves around the community and evolves. That's the idea here is that there's no minimum bar here. We need to look at the opportunities, but we do have some very good political support and some political engagement in this discussion with the most recent tours that you've been on. I feel like we're in a really good opportunity to keep that momentum going. So yes, please ask your questions or provide your input.
Thank you, Nathan. So let me just start this out by saying council has been engaged on this topic ever since it came up, and we are very thankful to have such a good briefing today and a complete package and a corridor study report that we would like you to finalize. I'm sure you will hear from each council member who will have plenty of time to talk to you about this, but my guess is that all of us want you to finalize this report. It's really useful. And then as far as the strategies and the three options that Caleb outlined, we are not probably the best people to figure out that. We'll provide some thoughts, but we look to you to guide us. But what we are committed to is getting the job done. We want to see this stuff implemented, both the environmental things, the multimodal things, and the official truck route designation. So with that lead in, let me start with Mike, and we will have some dialogue, questions and suggestions and comments back and forth. Thanks for assembling such a great team, Caleb and Nathan, I really appreciate it. You've got some outstanding people helping us. We appreciate that. Mike, your comments or questions?
Thanks, Bob. Yes, I appreciate, I think we all do, getting the facts, data, and information on the table. I really don't have any questions. I would just echo everything that you said, Bob, and I'm on very much the same page.
Thank you, Mike. Cammie?
I don't have any questions. Thank you for all your work, guys, on this project. I think it sounds like a great idea.
Thanks, Cammie. Colby?
Yeah, I guess my only questions would be what's next? How do we keep moving forward on all of this?
Thanks, Colby. So Nathan and Caleb, help us with that. We certainly are interested in making this a reality and not just having a great plan. So help us think that through today with the remainder of our time.
I'll take the first stab here, Caleb. I think the first thing we have to do now that we have all these facts is start to put them in some kind of perspective. And I think the charge for staff moving forward will be to really break down and start looking at the pros and the cons of the various financial investments, as well as the necessity that might be for a potential exchange. And so kind of creating a matrix that says, okay, these types of improvements are essential, whether the intersections or certain things like that, certain drainage facilities may be necessary. Some of the other things, as far as, multimodal improvements and other wants may have a different level of importance for different agencies. And so breaking those out in some kind of matrix, as well as maybe putting that into a technical paper of some sort that we can provide to both boards that summarizes, this is how we climb that mountain. But it's also something too that we need to make sure that we're identifying realistic timelines for these things, because if those improvements are going to occur, there needs to be the necessary funding. And both ITD and the city have plans to invest in those rights of way, but now we have a lot more information that shows some of the additional investment that's needed.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. I would echo a lot of that in saying we would need to talk about priorities and talk about what really is, all we've presented on the report so far is everything that's out there. Talk about what really is on the table for discussion as far as a negotiation, if you will, or an agreement between the state and the city. I will point out that, the state is charged with maintaining the through traffic on the state highway. And so there are several aspects of the master plan that would be in question of whether or not those are things we're going to pursue, the multimodal stuff, some of the downtown revitalization things. I think we need to get to a point where we're talking, okay, we have those on the table, but now what are we really going to be negotiating about? And then what's realistic, right? We talk about timeframes. Even if we had all this, if we had all the money that was listed out today on the table, it still would take several years to get that stuff completed, designed, and built. Do we want to wait that long, right? I mean, I go back to my comment about willing parties. I think there's a lot of value in finding what can be done, what's realistic, what's appetizing to both the council and the IT board, and making a deal that gets us closer, but may not be everything, but gets us to a point that it's workable. In some of our previous, just to give you an example of that in previous discussions, we've talked about how from Dinehart to, I believe it's Colorado, Nathan, correct me if I'm wrong, but that piece is kind of this bottleneck where you come into town, you got the wide intersection, you go back down to 2 lanes and you widen back out. Maybe we look at trying to see how we get that piece improved to meet the master plan, and we don't focus on the other portions before an exchange happens, just as an example. But my point is, I think we need to define what our bounds are, what's realistic, and what our target timeline is. Because if it goes another decade, certainly not all of the same players are going to be at the table when the efforts have been made. Oh yes, one other thing I wanted to add. Thank you, Julie. the airport, and this was talked about a little bit, but the airport, the realignment of those curves and the right-of-way discussion there, that's a big question mark and plays into what the airport wants to do and the idea of trying to move the runway further south potentially. So a lot of questions there, a lot of continued conversation needs to happen with Federal Aviation Administration, your airport manager. So there is a big question mark there on the airport that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, and the other thing I might add is that, you know, Caleb has experienced a number of these exchanges, and I really think I would like to better understand, you know, what were the critical pieces there, and really look at those arrangements and to see how it went from an idea to actual decision makings and signing on the dotted line. And I think using those experiences as a guide of how we can efficiently get this done is something we also need to do, because those are three terrific examples. Council might be the one closest and most recognized by our community, but each one of them, something made it a success. And I think if we can identify those as well and say, taking from those three different examples, what might be best taken from those to utilize in a potential exchange agreement for the city would be another next step.
And the city council is looking to you, Caleb, and to Nathan and all of your consultants to help us with that. Because again, with highly technical things, so give us options and we will weigh in. We certainly like what we're hearing in terms of keeping the momentum, keeping the sense of urgency on this, and flexibility, keep moving ahead. That's what council would like. So Nathan, do you have any more presentation, or would you like to hear more from council?
No more presentation. Happy to hear more comments.
All right. Mike, further input you would like to provide, or thoughts or philosophy? The floor is yours.
I really don't have anything to add other than I'm certainly in support of continuing to move forward as Caleb and Nathan are recommending. In the long term, I mean, obviously there are a lot of considerations, you know, particularly when we get into the costs associated with it all. But every step forward is a good step, and yeah, I'm just on board.
Thank you, Mike. Kenny, your thoughts?
I don't have any other questions. I'm definitely on board. I am concerned about the airport. If we had to change that, you know, what the cost or what the difficulties would be with that, obtaining that right away, moving the airstrip, that kind of stuff, that is a concern. But other than that, I think everything is moving forward great, and like to see more.
Thank you, Kenny. Colby?
Yeah, it's nice to see kind of some numbers and kind of get more clarity on what this is going to take. We've been discussing for many years, and so it's nice to see we're continuing to move forward. And yeah, I'd really like to see next steps. Figure out, dig deeper down in the details of what it's actually going to take to do this, because clearly there's a lot of detail to be considered. So it's pretty exciting. I wish that I could give more input or direction at this point, but I think that the information you provided was super helpful and promising, you know, and I'm glad, you know, particularly with consideration to the runoff into the lake, and hopefully also being considered for that river zone on how we can best protect our waterway through there too. So yeah, keep up the good work, and I'm looking forward to some more discussion on this.
Thank you, Colby. So Caleb and Nathan, council is very much in appreciation for all the material you've presented in the past and today's presentation. And we are on board, with asking you to finalize the corridor study report. And we encourage you to schedule more time to talk to us about how we can incrementally implement the highest priority items to keep the momentum going and keep getting closer to our vision of being able to exchange and have a true truck route that is the Dinehart Boydstone connection.
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask, you talk about giving direction to finalize the report. My understanding was that the report at this point is considered draft final pending today's meeting. Will the council members be providing, or will you be providing comments to that report? I ask because Julie had a couple comments she wanted us to incorporate, so I just wanted to understand the council's pleasure on that topic.
Nathan, what's your input to me on this?
Yeah, thank you. I think we've heard from the council today. I think there were multiple opportunities to hear from each member, and I think what we heard today was useful. And most of their comments are encouraging and requesting that we come back with next steps. There were a few small things that we did identify over the past couple days. Name change, whether it's Boydstone or Dinehart, I think we all get confused with that because it's the actual juncture is on a curve of the road. But as the recommended action is shown in the agenda bill, we can clean up those small little grammatical errors and bring this back to the council for adoption. I think the formal process is by resolution. So if we review the comments from ITD and we feel that those comments are fundamentally changing the report, then we would bring it back to you and present those changes to you. But everything that's been presented to me so far are simply formatting, maybe making sure that the headers and things are perfect. And that's why we would bring it back for adoption.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm looking across the room to City Manager Annette. Are you good with that? She's nodding her head. Council, are you good with that?
Yes.
Yes.
And then that's to move forward with creating the final report.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good with moving forward on that. And curious about other comments.
All right. So that's our input to Caleb and Nathan on that issue, finalizing the report.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would like to hear from ITD. I believe it's Julie that was wanting to talk about some comments, perhaps the airport or other items.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate the all of the council members. It's nice to have one more Zoom or Teams meeting the week before Christmas. I appreciate it. None of us have had enough meetings this year online. Yes, no, I think Caleb addressed the airport situation, and that was a concern for me. And maybe I would only say that I think it's a significant issue with FAA and their flight pattern and being at the north end of their runway, and to move their runway south or to their operation south it's I don't want to say insurmountable, but that is a very, very heavy lift. So I have some concerns about that piece there, and Caleb and I think Nathan and Brian can talk about that further. There may be some things we can do without actually getting it completely to the specs that are required or kind of required on a couple of those turns there. But you know, I've expressed any concerns I have with Caleb, and I know he can work with Nathan and the technical folks. I'm a policy wonk, not an engineer, so let's get that out there to begin with. But that was a concern of mine. You know, I have pretty good support from the other board members. They've all seen this. They understand the issue. Everybody says, wow, a state highway right here on the lake, taking that hard left. I mean, they're in support of doing something, but I can assure you that they have not seen an exchange at the level that these numbers indicate financially. And that's because, as we've discussed, the top half of that chart is a significant amount of money, and a lot of it, I guess it's, well, timely, it's a Christmas wish list. But there's a lot of things in there that are very valid to an exchange, and there could be ways that we could leverage each other's projects where we can get more money out of our money by doing things together or looking for grant opportunities. But I do think, no matter how you slice it, it's just looking at the map that's on the chart. It's really a no-brainer that Dinehart is absolutely a better route to be a state route. It simply isn't, but that's unfortunate. But we have what we have right now. But I can tell you that the board would be committed to finding a way to do something, but they would be shocked at the number that's in the report, and I don't think I could get them anywhere close to that, but I know that I can get them to keep talking about it. And with Nathan, Brian, and Caleb's work on this, you know, I think we do have the right people in the room. If the governor decides to keep me. So I think it's a good thing. I appreciate all of the effort that went into the report. It's very comprehensive. Brian, you did a great job. And I appreciate everybody's efforts to try to find a way to make this move forward in a fashion that works for both the state and the city. So, and you know, ultimately for the people who are on our roads, to make it safer for people who are vacationing and walking and living in Mccall, people who are, you know, truck drivers just trying to get product, you know, from the interstate up to North Idaho or wherever they may be headed. So I appreciate all of your time. Thank you for everything that you guys do for your city.
Julie, thank you for joining us today. I listened intently in your words, and it's very encouraging. I think we do have a great team assembled, and I have a lot of confidence in ITD and in your board. And I hope the governor keeps you on that committee. So Nathan and Caleb, you have the floor for final comments.
Okay, well, I don't have any other comments. We will in short time get this report finalized with a bow on it, and you'll see it on one of your agendas for adoption. Caleb, anything else to add?
Nope, just want to say thank you to the council for giving us the time today to present this. We put a lot of effort into it and excited to keep moving forward. So thank you for your support.
You're very welcome. I believe that is everything on our agenda for today, and Annette's helping me. She's nodding her head, so we are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody, have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, good job.
Yeah, you.